Hello. In this video, I would like to talk about late 15th and 16th centuries of Western Christian view on Turks and Islam and the publications related to Turks and Islam in that period. First of all, the late 15th and 16th centuries, Western Christians experienced widespread fear and expectations of imminent invasion of the Turks. The powerful Ottoman Empire and its swift westward advance was seen as a major threat to the very existence of Christendom. Westward conquest of the Turkish Empire created panic among the Western Christians, and it was not entirely unjustified. Ottoman forces conquered Constantinople in 1453, Athens in 1458, and Belgrade in 1521. And Turkish forces defeated Christian forces at Mohawk in 1526. And finally, the siege of Vienna in 1529. When Turkish power spread and Christendom lost territories, fear and curiosity about this formidable enemies grew. Significance of the Turkish threat is clearly reflected in European publications, especially during the Reformation era. Many chronicles printed on the Turks and their religion. As Gregory Miller notes that in the first half of the 16th century, just in German-speaking territories, more than 350 pieces of literature were published on the topic of Turks. This print contains a great deal of anti-Turkish propaganda. The authors regarded the Ottoman Turks not as a political force, but as a representatives of Islam, and also a traditional enemy of Christendom. For those authors, Turks wanted to conquer the entire world and would not stop until they destroyed the Christianity. The Turks created a double threat to the Christendom. Militarily, they could not be defeated, and religiously, they could not be converted. The danger was not only physical, but also spiritual. The spiritual danger was evident in three areas. The first, the Turks were widely believed to be a tool of a devil designed to destroy the church. Second, for some Christians, especially in German-speaking lands and some Anabaptists, admired, even desired Turkish rule instead of the Holy Roman Empire. And finally, the Turks were a spiritual threat because they enticed their Christian captives to repudiate Christ and forfeit their salvation. According to those authors, I'm quoting from Gregory Miller here, if the Turks captured an individual, he or she was in serious eternal danger. This danger was not because the Turks forced them into hell, however, but because captives were like to convert voluntarily to Islam. Therefore, many publications were aimed primarily at domestic readership and have the explicit aim of trying to ward off apostasy. The Turks in these publications were portrayed as worshippers of false god, followers of material religion, and sought only power, wealth, and sex. In those publications, the Turks were presented exactly as to what the Christians were not. The Turkish advance towards Western Europe also aroused curiosity about their custom, race, religion, and their social life. In this way, authors sought to satisfy the reader's need for information about this most cruel, barbaric race, which is Turks. Perhaps the most important question, especially for modern historians, is this. What did the Western Christians of medieval times and into the 16th and 17th centuries know about the Turks and Islam? And how had they learned of them? Understandably, information came from the eyewitness accounts was found reliable compared to the secondary accounts and hearsay accounts. Diplomats, pilgrims, merchants, travelers, war captives provided rich information for Western Christians. Among those eyewitnesses, war captive accounts caused special interest because of authors' significant period of captivity among the Turks. Their memoirs and thoughts on Turks were widely read and become bestsellers. Gregory Miller writes that in 15th and 16th centuries in Europe, two publications by former slaves of Turks were extremely important. These texts are Tractatus de Moribus Turcarum, a pamphlet of the customs of the Turks, which is attributed to George of Hungary, and Bartholomew Georgiev's two-part of publication. The first one is on the rituals and ceremonies of the Turks, and the second one on the affliction of the captive Christians, living under the tribute of the Turks. Both of these publications were printed numerous times and were translated into the vernacular languages. In this lecture, I will solely focus on George of Hungary and his work Tractatus. Although we do not possess a detailed information and profile on George's life, still his work Tractatus gives us sufficient information about his life. He was born in 1422 or 1423 in Transylvania. And then when Turkish Sultan Murat II conquered the town of Mubah in 1438, he was captured and sold into slavery. By the time that he was captured and sold into slavery, he was around 16 years old. After 20 years of captivity, he finally managed to escape back into the Christian lands. He joined the Dominican order and settled in Rome, probably after 1473. Excuse me. There, he wrote anonymously his work Tractatus de Moribus Condictionibus et Nequica Turcorum, which was first published in 1481. It is considered as a very important source on Ottoman Turks, customs, and their religion. Dr. Grafton notes that Tractatus provided both positive and negative examples of Turkish society. For this reason, Luther found it most dependable and reliable source on Turks and their religion. And Luther, used George's work as a weapon in his assault on Islam. Luther wrote, I'm quoting, I'm also publishing this book for another purpose, to forestall and stumbling block of Mohammedanism. Because we now have the Turk and his religion in our vicinity, our people must be warned, less moved by the outward appearance of their religion and state of their behavior, or taking offense at the lowness of our faith or the deformity of our behavior. They deny their Christ and follow after Muhammad. George claims that he had written his work out of his own experience of Turkish captivity. In the preface, he states his reasons for writing Tractatus were to instruct others who may become captives, and also to record his recollections for his own use if he captured again. One might ask why George was still worried about being captured. At the time he wrote his work, he was residing in Rome. However, we know that in southern Italy, the Ottoman invasion of Otranto under the command of Gedik Ahmet Pasha in 1480 caused this fear. In fact, not just George, but all of Italy felt this horror. For example, the Pope Sixtus IV prepared to flee from Rome to France and called Western kings to defend the Holy See. However, His words were not heeded by the ruling powers. Meanwhile, such fears were widely shared among the populace of Western Christians, especially after the Turkish capture of Constantinople in 1453. Sharing this fear, George intended to show the physical and spiritual dangers that Christian captives in Ottoman lands were facing. Reading George's work, Luther voiced the same concern. Quote, I strongly urge that the children be taught the catechism should they be taken captive in invasion. They will at least take something of the Christian faith with them. Luther's words stress that all Western Christendom, especially in German-speaking lands, felt threatened by Turkish advance at the high possibility of becoming captive. Tractatus is a large text that contains 23 chapters plus a preface, a prologue, and 3 appendices, 2 Turkish poems translated from Ottoman Turkish to Latin, which is remarkable, and a treatise by a popular preacher, Joachim of Fiore. The whole treatise contains a Johannist apocalyptic nuance. Apocalyptic Christian perceptions also worth mentioning. Many medieval authors, actually, have tried to make sense of chaotic times through apocalypticism. Theologians like Joachim of Fiore, Nicholas of Lyra, Paul of Burgos, and Johann Hilton interpreted Islam through the lens of apocalyptical ideas. They focus on the signs that indicate the last days and the Antichrist. For George, Turkish threat was real, targeting the hearts of Christians. He was confident that he was living in the end times, quote from George here, since we are certain that it is we upon whom the end of time has come. Therefore, George, quoting from Joachim of Fiore's interpretations of Revelation 13 from Bible, he accuses Christians of being blind-eyed and criticized their carelessness. Also, he used this allegory of Christians as sheep and Turk as wolf. George asked this question, quote, for if a sheep is not able to live for an hour in the hands of the wolf, between whom there is a natural enmity, how is a Christian able to live in the hands of the Turks, where the enmity is of the supernatural or spiritual kind? In an apologetic perspective, George describes the Turks and their religion, the danger that Christians in that time were facing. George presented rich descriptions about Turks and their religion in an effort to show the falseness and brutality of them. In this way, he aimed to raise the awareness of European Christians against this formidable enemy. Alongside the physical threat, he also explained the spiritual danger, which is Christian apostasy. He analyzed the motivating factors behind Christian conversion to Islam. George warned his readers not to underestimate the danger of Christian apostasy. He himself witnessed not only the simple but also the wise who converted to Islam. So in his text, he gave 2 examples of Christian priests converted to Islam. According to George, Turks not only enslave Christians' material freedom, but also put their souls in peril. Therefore, the real danger was that those Christians who live under Turkish rule eventually denied their faith in Christ and converted to the religion of Turks. Many other Christian authors held the same notion and fear. For example, Luther wrote, quote, I sincerely believe that no papist, monk, cleric, or their equal in faith would be able to remain in their faith if they should spend 3 days among the Turks. According to George, one reason for Christian conversion to Islam was Turks' positive outward appearances. He pointed out the sharp contrast between the Ottoman and European cultures, such as political corruptions and clerical abuses. He points to the simplicity of Turkish culture in the Turkish absence of alcohol and their disdain from any idolatrous practices. Especially when he talks about the Turkish lifestyle, he seems to have been deeply impressed. He calls them very plain in their clothing and pious in their behavior. According to his observations, they, Turks, looked like monks in the monasteries. They were not hypocrites, but humble, not just in the public, but in their homes as well. He knows that even the Turkish Sultan kept his life simpler than a European monarch. So he gives this example. Sultan walked from his palace to the mosque across the street with only two young guards, as opposed to the emperor or even a pope. And also, George gives this story that he said that he heard it from a from a priest in a church. Ottoman Sultan, probably Mehmet II, the conqueror, visited this church in Istanbul, and Ottoman Sultan, the Mehmet II, promised the Christian bishop to provide necessary things for his office. George was impressed by the Sultan's humbleness and his tolerance toward non-Muslims, so he cannot help but ask himself this question, quote from George, but who in distant lands, hearing about the king's victories and wars and size of the army, his fame and glory, how could they suspect that there was such a simplicity in him? And when they hear that, how could they not admire him? George also knows about the piety of Muslim worships, and cannot help himself but show admiration. Quote from George. It will be tedious to detail the order, good conduct, and silence that they have in the mosque. Nevertheless, I will say this briefly, but I consider in the silence in a Turkish mosque and uproar in a Christian church at the time of prayer. A great wonder arises in me about such a reversal of order, namely that there can be such devotion in the first and such lack of devotion in the second. The Tractatus of George was an important and very influential text on the perceptions and responses to Turks and Islam through the Middle Ages. It also served as a primary source for Luther's study of Islam and the Turks. George's presentation of good aspects of the Turks and Islam made him a reliable and unbiased source in Luther's eyes. His imprisonment gave George a special authority to discuss Turkish culture. He wrote he had even forgotten his mother tongue and spoke only the barbaric Turkish language during his slavery times. George in his Tractatus provided information about his captors, which is Turks. He gives detailed picture of the Turkish life and religion. Many of the subjects that George covered are Turkish history, the origins of Turks. He talks about various Sufi orders. He talks about Islamic belief system, rituals, and piety, every mundane practice of Turks, and conditions of Christian captives, and slavery, and conversion to Islam, and gender relations among the Turks. His observations and personal experience indicate that he deeply admired the Turks. He did not hesitate openly praise them. Yet, at the same time, he expressed harsh criticism, calling them the Antichrist and adherents of an evil sect. In his captivity, after observing Turkish customs and Islam, George seriously considered converting to Islam. Feeling hopeless and abandoned by God, he might have had a deep crisis of faith. George eventually overcame his spiritual struggle and maintained his Christian faith. Thank you.